conversation. We're delighted to have Robert Penfold, who has been on your television screens for many decades. And as you'll hear and as you'll see, there's hardly a moment in history, in living memory, that Robert has not witnessed. It's an extraordinary story, and I look forward to bringing you this conversation with Robert. Great.
One, two, 1, 2. 1, 2. Until now, the Australians have had a fairly uneventful time up here. None of that frontline experience that we've seen being experienced by the Americans. But that all changed just a few minutes ago. A round came in, a mortar round, and dropped about 100 metres outside the wall, and a few more have come since. They're obviously trying to move closer and find their target. The ground war began at 4 a.m. in the Gulf. The Iraqis were surprised and overwhelmed. This first day of the ground war has gone better than anyone could have dared predict it. The Serbs have taken 2/3 of Bosnia. The cameraman who took these pictures was hit by shrapnel. The first American troops slipped quietly onto the beaches in Mogadishu in the early morning hours. The US troops are now edging their way towards the city, confiscating weapons as they go. This may look like some sort of war, but the Americans prefer to call it their battle to save the starving. Yes, well, certainly an historic day here in the street outside of Nelson Mandela's house in Soweto.
I greet you all in the name of peace.
A mere few days ago, this would have been a shooting offence, but how the order has changed. Now the wall is almost a plaything, something to be enjoyed. With the permission of Parliament, Charles could still succeed to the throne. His new wife, if there was one, would become the Queen of England. The Catholic section of Belfast closed down today as the tens of thousands of mourners farewelled the 3 members of the IRA.
Get down! Get down! Everybody get down!
It's thought that many bombs may be still planted in some of the graves. The situation here is still very tense.
Obviously a major malfunction.
America has now gone into a week of mourning for the astronauts. The continual stalling by Spate has further distressed the hostages' families today. After 5 weeks of this, they now feel that they have also become his victims.
He's a good kisser.
For the first time in months, Hillary Clinton rejoined the public battle to save her husband. She hinted there'd been enough heartbreak and it was time to forgive. George Bush has little to celebrate. He's won this election by a hair's breadth and will be forever reminded that it was eventually decided by the judges.
It collapsed. The top floors collapsed down.
At this stage, it's impossible to get any idea of the casualty numbers, though the grim reality is the World Trade Center is the workplace of up to 50,000 people. Just as the hurricane... They've been predicting a catastrophe of these proportions for years here in New Orleans, but still when it happened, they weren't ready.
These events have caused a nightmare for my family, my children and me.
And we're expecting even more fireworks when the boy's mother appears in the witness stand, because the Jackson people say she is the problem. Christopher Reeve was 52 and a superman to the very end. Oh, here we go. Brazil is making no secret of the fact that this is a very blatant attempt to win the Olympic Games for Rio in 2012, meaning the $5 million they've spent this week is just the start of it. In Rio de Janeiro, Robert Penfold, National 9 News.
That's a sign-off that we're all incredibly familiar with. Robert Penfold from Los Angeles, thank you very much for joining us today.
Hi, Jacinta, and hello to everybody in Hong Kong there. Nice to speak with you all. I hear a lot about it. I hear a lot about Hong Kong from Andrew Penfold, my cousin, and it's glad to be part of it here tonight. So thank you.
Well, it's wonderful that through Andrew we were able to arrange today's conversation.
Right. Okay.
Where do we even begin, Robert, with such a wide-ranging career? I mean, that video just showed how many of, as I said, the extraordinary historic events that you've witnessed. But how did a boy from Campbelltown, 60 kilometres out of Sydney, end up leading an extraordinary international career like this? And did you ever dream of this, that this would be your future?
No, absolutely not at all. You know, you could never have thought, being a kid from a country town as it was in those days, that it could have all led to what you just saw then. But I started off, as you did, as a cadet newspaper journalist on a country newspaper. And, you know, it was a wonderful ride. I enjoyed all of that, and slowly moved into television and radio and a country TV network up in Tamworth in New South Wales, and eventually got down to Sydney. And, well, the rest of it, as you can see, I went on a skyrocket after that. It was a rocket ship ride after that. It was very enjoyable.
And of course, now you're sitting in LA. You're no longer permanently with Channel 9, but remain as a special commentator and correspondent for them. And of course, we've all been gripped by what's been happening in the US under the Trump presidency, gripped by the images of what occurred in the Capitol and January 6th. And of course, overnight here in Hong Kong, we received the news that in fact Trump would go to trial as for the impeachment. What's the mood like in the US, Robert? Again, watching it from afar, it seems just simply extraordinary what has occurred in the past 4 years under President Trump.
Yeah, well, a lot of people, I think, will have changed their minds again about what they were feeling. Some people maybe might have been a bit ambivalent about it, that, you know, it was a terrible thing, and, you know, if they're very strong Republicans perhaps, and think, oh, well, we'll move on. But what happened today was very interesting, because right at the very beginning, and you've got to think, like, this is like a prosecution case. This is like a court case of somebody sitting up there, although Trump's not there in the dock, of course. But what the prosecutors did, and the prosecutors in this case obviously being the Democrats, they went and they gathered a whole lot of videotape that we haven't seen before. And the sort of videotape that we saw was even more brutal and more pretty disgusting, really, the way that those rioters were actually treating the police officers and the law holders there in, and you could see just how dangerous the situation was, and how lucky it was that they didn't get into the House of Representatives there and start either taking hostages or beat up people or whatever. But those people who were trying to break in, as we saw from these new videos today, were extremely angry, furious. It's interesting, they left a lot of the expletives in as well, and supered it, as we said, just so that people around America could see what it was like in there and experience it firsthand. But
do you think you've been shocked by that latest video evidence?
Yes, I think so, and I'm sure a lot of the Republicans who will still vote not to well, Trump has been impeached already, but not to find him guilty. I'm sure a lot of those Republicans must be having second thoughts about the fact is that really what should they do now? I'm sure if they talk to a lot of their constituents and whatever, once they've seen that video, people will be saying to a lot of these Republican senators, you have to reassess what you're going to do here on this, because what we saw today was just outrageous, more so than we've seen before.
And again, watching it from afar, I think what's extraordinary is that only 6 Republicans voted in favour of this going to trial. When you see the evidence, it really is horrifying. And I wonder, standing outside the US, and you've been reporting on the US through the eyes of Australia, whether it gives you a more balanced view. Again, we look on the US in disbelief at what has occurred. What's your sense of that, Robert?
I'm not surprised by what I saw. I know how angry those people out there, many of them out there in Middle America, they feel as though Trump was their savior. And they started to believe his lies. And he continued to put it out. And eventually, a non-reality became a reality for them. It was just extraordinary that somebody, and it's interesting to look at other people in history who have been able to infect the brains of so many people in their nations as well and turn it into a terrible debacle as per the Second World War. I wasn't surprised to see that they were that angry. I was surprised to see that the authorities weren't prepared for it. I was very surprised, having seen the riots that happened and the amount of force that was used by the military and by the police against the Black Lives Matter riots. And, well, it wasn't a riot. They turned into a riot because they were pushed back because Trump needed to go and stand in front of the church with the Bible. There was a heavy, heavy police force there. And I was surprised that there was so little amount of police around the Capitol, because for some reason they said they didn't, you know, the mayor said she didn't want to cause a scene or whatever, but you know, it's to get back to the issue. Was I surprised? I wasn't surprised that they were that angry, because even though the election had well passed and most people that we know sort of believe that, okay, there's no way that he didn't lose, yet all those hundreds of thousands still believed in what he was saying and were prepared. And of course, let's not forget, he called them there on that day and he told them, let's all go up there. The funny thing was, of course, not funny, but sad. He said, let's go. We'll go up there now. And they all turned around and they walked away. He got in his limousine, turned in a different direction and drove in the opposite direction and went home.
What do you think he'll do now?
Well, he's sitting and throwing probably a shoe at the television at the moment, each day, as he will for the next 5 or 6 days as this trial goes on. Because already they're saying that he was very unhappy with the performance of his lawyers who are there today. But what do I see? I still think that he wants to be relevant. I still believe that he'll eventually find a way to become the man that he believes that he is. And those followers of his are waiting for him to make his next move. He can't work on Twitter any longer. He can't work on Facebook any longer. But eventually he's sitting there and making a plan to become relevant one more time. And, you might have seen in that video that I was there with Donald Trump. It was, that was around about 2008. I spent half a morning with him at his office. And even then I asked him, did you think he would be the president? And this was because at this stage, the show, The Apprentice, was going to go to Australia. And so therefore he made himself available for a morning for me to go and interview him and talk about it and all of that. But what we saw for 4 years, that giant ego, was exactly what I saw in that office back in 2008. Nothing has changed at all. And when I asked him, did he want to be the president? He sort of said, well, maybe, but I'm very busy here. I've got a lot of things to do, but a lot of people want me to be. And I thought, that was a fun question as far as I was concerned. Little did I know.
You and the Simpsons predicted it.
Never.
Yeah. And again, we look at looking at from afar, we see what appears to be an increasing polarisation in the US. And I wonder whether, Robert, you think that same polarisation, whereas you've said there will be Republicans who will side with President Trump, although they feel that they might even be morally bankrupted by doing so. But this polarisation that's occurred in society, perhaps fueled by social media, do you see that being at risk and at play potentially in Australia?
Well, I know that, interestingly enough, there's a lot of bitterness down there then. When I put out something on Twitter about Trump, and, I've always been trying to be a straight down the line journalist. I'm a reporter. I'm not, I don't do opinion. I can now because I'm not working as a reporter anymore for Channel 9. But my opinion there is that I think that in Australia, there's a great division as well. Nowhere near as bad as in the United States. Because the Australians, a lot of the angst here in America is about the fact that you have to think of cities like Detroit and that get all through Michigan and get down through the middle America and all of that. And those people are very disenfranchised. I understand that they're angry. I understand why they're angry. I've been out there and I've reported, and they've really got the short end of the straw for many years now. And they look back on the 50s and the 60s when they had health benefits, when they worked in the car factories and when Chrysler and Ford ruled the roost. But when, of course, when all the car manufacturing sort of started to break down, when all the manufacturing moved, the steel making and all of that moved out and ended up in Asia or whatever, these people eventually have slowly dropped to the bottom of the pile. And they're angry about that. And Trump sensed that. And to become the president, he actually touched that nerve. And that's how he got them in. But I don't see it in Australia. I don't see that people are that badly off, that they're that angry. In Australia, you know, I go back and I think, wow, this is a great place to live. You know, you've got beautiful climates. Everyone gets pretty well looked after. After 65, you know, you get, as a pensioner, you get looked after, you get free transport on trains and all of that. Health-wise, if something happens, my American friend, she got an appendicitis in Sydney. She went there, she said, I love that health system down there. They put me into the hospital, they operated on me, and they didn't even charge me a penny. They said, that's all right, it'll get covered. I don't know if it works quite like that. It was about 7 years ago. But don't get an appendicitis or appendix if you're coming from Hong Kong.
Yeah.
In the United States, you're up for $15,000 for one night.
That's, I think, one of the many differences is that you see in the US people labelling a system like Medicare, which Australia is very proud of, as communist. And again, that just seems so foreign to us. And I wanted perhaps to come to some of those aspects of US culture that are difficult for non-Americans to understand. And that is the obsession with guns and with firearms. Again, I'd be interested to hear your thoughts on that, Robert, and we'll touch on the conspiracy theories as well. We talked before we came on air of the fact that you were actually at Sandy Hook. That terrible, the tragic massacre in which conspiracy theorists have labelled that as a hoax, and yet there were parents who had their 6, 7, 8-year-olds gunned down. And again, in the wake of something like Sandy Hook, it seems extraordinary to think that still there's this obsession with the right to bear arms. Can I have your thoughts on that?
Yeah, well, all the time, I've covered so many school shootings, sadly I've lost count, and college shootings and mass shootings, and you know what happened in Las Vegas 18 months ago. And every time the anchors from our morning shows or my evening news will stand, they say, Robert, surely this time it means they will take the guns away after this has happened. 52 dead in Las Vegas. In Sandy Hook, 20 school children, 5 and 6 years old, plus 7 teachers. And they say, surely they'll take the guns away. And I said, it's not going to happen. I've been here for too long. And this right to bear arms is just something that no president will ever go near, as far as trying to even put that in any sort of agenda if you were going to run for president, because it's a no-win situation. And it's just all about, the Americans having a right to do what they want. And interesting, you talk about healthcare. Those people who are so disenfranchised are the ones who need free healthcare or a Medicare system. But they don't like it because they believe, and then they've been told that it's a socialist agenda. And that's, socialist is a dirty word out there in a lot of America.
So describe for us what it was like then, Robert, going to Sandy Hook. You were there within hours, I believe, of the massacre occurring.
That's right, yeah. It's one of the more emotional stories that I've had to do. You know, when you go out as a reporter, people say, how do you handle these sad situations? How can you cope? But what I do, and as a reporter who has to go to continue to do these tragedies, you put on what I say, your reporter's blinkers, and you just look at the story, know what it is, and you can't get too taken in by what's going on around you, because if you did, you'd just crumple in a heap. Particularly at Sandy Hook, you can imagine, as we saw those parents of those 20 children, they were the ones at the next day, their children didn't come out, and they knew by then, but they hadn't been into the school at this stage. They're the sorts of visions that I still have in my mind of those parents actually walking down to the school the day after, whereas the other 150 parents were able to go to the school the day before and take their children away and safely. The parents had to spend most of the night and then be taken in. Those sorts of things, you know, are heartbreaking. But again, you know, that's it. And for me now to hear somebody, like Marjorie Taylor Greene, who is the politician now, who is a Republican, who is in the House of Representatives, who was saying that it didn't happen. She was putting it out there on Twitter that it didn't happen. And not only that, at one stage, running down the street after one of the fathers actually haranguing him about, why are you here? It didn't happen. Now, she's a politician and she was recently voted into the Congress. So work that out.
It's just impossible, isn't it, to comprehend. But again, we've seen a proliferation of conspiracy theories, particularly, I think, since COVID. And it's been fueled by social media, which feeds off this polarisation of the audience. So people retreat into their echo chambers. In Australia, we have a couple of backbenchers who are contributing to undermining government public health messages, spreading their own conspiracy theories. QAnon, of course, began in the US. What are your thoughts on conspiracy theories and their impact globally?
Well, a lot of it has to do with use of social media, of course, that everybody's now being able to pass things on and people believe things. I have great friends who believe some of that, because one of them is a 94-year-old friend of ours who, she's a Republican and proud of it, and likes to wear her Make America Great hat to restaurants when I take her out, which is a little bit challenging. But when you're 94, you can get away with that sort of thing. But she believes a lot of that stuff that she sees on Facebook. And I just go, well, it's not really quite like that. But she's just one of many out there. And the conspiracy theory, it's, as I say, it's a strange and terrible beast that's rolling through the United States at the moment. And it's festering because still, people believe what Donald Trump said, that he won the election. But he not only won the election, it was a landslide that he won by. And there are so many people out there who still believe it. And they believe why it happened, because he said this happened and that happened, whatever. And then it gets its own life. And sadly, it's not any better. America is a very divided nation. It hasn't been healed by this election. And Joe Biden, as you will see today, he's been asked continually about what he thinks about the Senate. He said, I don't want to go there. It's up to the senators to do. He can't afford to start with that, because if he gets caught up in that stuff, there's 6 months of his presidency lost, and he's got so many things to do. To try to bring America together is just the greatest, huge job at the moment, to try to get some of the Republicans at least believing that at least he's trying to help them as well. He's trying to reach out to them. I do care about you. But of course, they say, we don't care if you care about you because you shouldn't be president. You're not the real president. Donald Trump is.
And so, of course, you did meet Trump, as you mentioned, but you've also, you said, had met Biden some time back.
Yes, that's right. Yeah, only for a short time. But Joe's sort of a hail fellow, well met. Like no matter where you see him, everyone loves Joe Biden, particularly even when he was vice president as well. I was, this probably is going back to about 2007 or so. Joe was a senator at the time. We were catching a train from New York to Washington, and Joe jumped on. Joe would catch the train to be with his family. He lived halfway between Washington and New York, so he would go home every night and catch the train back to work the next day. So he jumped on and jumped in the seat next to us, and he looked down and saw TV camera. Oh, TV, turned around straight away, being a politician. I said, we're from Australia. He goes, oh, Australia, I love Aussies. Yeah, the Aussies, we're great, and all of that. We had a little bit of a chat about Australia and what was going on at the time. But to me, it said everything about Joe Biden. He's just the classic politician. And, I think he'll be a great president, even though he's a bit long in the tooth for it now. But I think he's going to have to mend a lot of fences, and he knows that. But he's very wily. He's got all that experience. So he's had a big job ahead, but that's what he wants to do. And that's why he's steering away from this whole impeachment thing. Doesn't want to know about it. Leave it to somebody else.
And what perspectives can you share about Biden's relationship with Australia? How will US-Australia relations play out? Of course, here in Hong Kong, we're at the epicentre of, it's been a very tense time between Australia and China. What are your perspectives in terms of the Trump administration in relation to China and Australia, and now the Biden presidency?
Well, Biden will go the way of every other president other than Donald Trump. Trump was all about make America great again and forget everybody else. And that was the way he wanted it to be. Whereas every president that we've ever dealt with if we're in Washington or whatever, and we're in the White House, the Australians, they just love the Australians because they know that the Australians, and every president who goes in, including Barack Obama, has a great sense of history. And that history is that the Australians have gone side by side with the United States in every major conflict, more so than any other nation. You know, Biden has already, through his advisors, has already reached out to the Australian government, as you would expect they will. And they're very aware of the issues that Australia is having with China at the moment. And so therefore, they've already given the heads up that they're prepared to work with them on that as well, to try to mend those fences, to try to normalize the relationship. But as far as the relationship is concerned, remember the last time Joe Biden went to Australia, which wasn't so long ago, he actually took his granddaughters there. Now, he wouldn't take them to many places, but he thought that was a friendly place to go. And so it was, he's always spoken very kindly about Australia, and he'll be a great ally again for the Aussies.
And again, I might, we will open it up to questions in sort of 10 minutes or so, but I will move to perhaps more fun things that you've experienced in your career as well, Robert. And you talked about some of the people that you've met. You attended, or you covered the wedding of Charles and Diana when you were based in the UK. And tell us, you also met the Queen.
That's right, yeah. Well, I didn't cover the wedding because that happened somewhat just before I got to London. Remember, I was the correspondent in London for 10 years before I came back here. But sadly, I did cover the breakup of Charles and Diana. I was there during the divorce, the split, all the nastiness, the secret boyfriends, the secret girlfriends, and all of that. So I was there for the unraveling of all of that. But yeah, people often say, what's the really one of the real highlights of it? And the real highlight for me was actually being invited to Windsor Castle to meet the Queen. This goes back to, I think, 2000, maybe 97. It was the bicentenary of Australia, and the Queen was to do a message for Australian television, which was to be played on all the channels. But they asked me to go along and be the person to sort of organise it and meet the Queen, get her settled and get her to give the message. But it was lovely. So we went up to Windsor Castle, and you can imagine they're driving into the gates of that, not with a big crowd of people, just myself, the cameraman and the sound recorders. We walked out, and there are the footmen opening the doors for you, and I walked into the foyer of Windsor Castle, just there, and off to the right were all these beautiful, beautiful baskets and blankets and shotguns, because Prince Philip was going shooting pheasant. He was about to head off, but all the picnic baskets were all there. We were taken then into a side room, which was the small library. So we waited there, you know, we're all very nervous and thinking how it's all going to go, the Queen of England and all that. So they said, I said to him, when will I know the Queen's, can you give us a bit of a heads up when the Queen's coming so we can stand up or get ready? He said, don't worry, you'll definitely know when the Queen's coming. I'm going, will you tell me how? He said, oh no, you'll know. And so anyway, so we waited about 5 minutes, then we heard tick, 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 these beautiful polished wooden floors. In came 3 corgis. And I thought, the Queen's about to come. And in came the corgis, and then in came the Queen. Handbag, even though she's inside, handbag came in. How do you do? Mr. Penfold, how do you do? Only 2 of us were allowed, only 2 were allowed to shake hands, but it was nice. And she was every bit that you would imagine, very lovely and polite, and sat down, and she did the message a few times for us on camera. And that was one of the fun things. And then the day after, we had to do the same. Went down to number 10 Downing Street and had another meeting, this time with Margaret Thatcher. And much the same, although she was very bossy. She was telling us what to do, move the light. I don't like that. Let's go. Come on, hurry up. I've got things to do. She was every bit the Iron Lady.
Right, so it is just as we've been watching on The Crown, of course, where it's brought to life that period as well. And I was going to ask if you met the corgis. That's absolutely wonderful. But Robert, again, you've also witnessed some extraordinary moments of history. You know, the scene that people have just watched of you standing on the wall as it comes down in Berlin. Can you describe for us what that was like?
Well, that was an amazing experience, and it was very unexpected as well. We had been, I'd been over in Berlin, West Berlin as it was in those days, for a few days because there was an uprising going across the border in East Germany. Things were unraveling. The Soviet Union had withdrawn all the funds, said we can't afford to keep you any longer. So they were trouble. That was trouble. And I did a story the night before for Australia, went to bed. You got to remember this is pre-cell phones or pre-mobile phones. So anyway, the phone call must be about 2 o'clock in the morning. The phone rings in the hotel room and it's the Sydney news editor going, wow, it's amazing what's happening there. God, it's incredible to think you're just there. And well, as you know, as a reporter, you don't ever you've got to pretend sometimes that you know, even if you don't. So I'm going, okay. He said, to think they're tearing down the wall while you're right there. So I was in a hotel so I picked up the phone and sort of looked out the curtain and people were running everywhere all over the place. I said, yeah, don't worry. I said, we're onto it. We're getting all the camera equipment and we're onto it now. So we went down there and actually went down to Checkpoint Charlie and they were already, the East Germans were starting to pour through at that stage. Then the next morning, they started smashing down the wall and I thought to the cameraman, I said to the camera, how about we get up? He said, yeah, okay. So they gave me a leg up and I stood up there and one of the beast of cameras was, in fact, if I had been here yesterday, I would have been shot by the guards over there. But they didn't know what to do with this. In fact, what they did was they got their big fire hoses and tried to hose us down off the wall, which didn't work because everyone was so excited to be there. But it was a great part of history to be part of. And as I said, a real surprise to everybody in Berlin. It just happened out of the blue overnight and really no one could have predicted it.
I think there are many watching this who would remember where they were that day. Now, tell us about where you were for September 11.
Oh, well, September 11, I was here in Los Angeles. Mm-hmm. And then luckily for us, our second reporter, Michael Usher, was in New York. And so he was there and was just getting on a plane at the time when it all happened. The planes were held up and his wife called him and said, you should get out off the plane. The buildings are burning. So he raced down there. And of course, because it was such upheaval and a nightmare there, it was hard for him to actually get onto air for some hours, maybe not until later in the afternoon. So I would go into the studio here in Los Angeles at the time. And I covered here, just trying to explain to Australians what was happening. Keep in mind, it was happening in Australia. It took Australian time around about 10 o'clock at night. It started to happen, and then it flowed through the evening as well. So yeah, that's how we did that. As the week went on, I was able to get onto a plane, and I think we stayed in New York covering that story for about another month and a half or so, 6 or 7 weeks, where we just stayed there. And it was a story every day of unfolding. When you think 3,500 Americans killed on one day, quite a story.
And again, that number just reminds me, of course, that you are in the US, which is facing a daily death toll of something in that number with the pandemic. Tell us what it's like in the US at the moment. How is the medical system withstanding this? How are you living your life in Los Angeles in the middle of the coronavirus?
Well, I'm actually sitting here in a little homemade studio that Channel 9 actually created for me with proper lights and a proper camera and things like that, because I have been reporting from home for most of the time. We've had to be very careful. Certainly I'm of the age too that you have to be more careful than others. I was very lucky, as was my wife Shah, and I did a story on this last week, that I was able to continue to get on the internet and eventually get an appointment, because being over 65 in Los Angeles, you're able to get an appointment. So I was able to get an appointment. I got one for Shah as well. And what we did, we set up little GoPro cameras in the car, and the cameraman sat right back in the third row of the seats, and we shot a great story about what it's like to show the Australians what the immunisation is like, and here's a first-hand account. But yeah, it's a frightening situation. We have been really basically in lockdown, wearing masks ever since, I think as you have been in Hong Kong, when we're outside since last March. It's restricted ourselves. We've been only able to see our newborn granddaughter, who was born in March. We've only seen little Gaia. Shah has seen her once. I saw her twice, just for a few hours, because I live in San Jose. Her mum, by the way, is Chinese. She was born in Shanghai. And so I've got beautiful little half Aussie, half Chinese grandchildren. And so you know, that's been hard. We haven't been able to do that. And when I go out on a story or whatever, this is why I haven't been traveling to do the election, as it were, or whatever, because it was too dangerous for somebody of my age to do. The young reporters went there. The reporter from Channel 7, the cameraman from Channel 7 here, all of them caught COVID. Friends of mine, my neighbours caught COVID. Yesterday, I took our elderly gardener, who is 86. I eventually went on and got her an appointment because she didn't have a computer. So I tried and tried. She's worked here in my little neighbourhood running the gardeners for 30 years, and she still comes to work every morning with them. I took her up to get her injection as well. Her best friend had died. Her friend who sells her all the plants and all of that, who runs the nursery, he died. So you can imagine it's been a real frightening situation for people like that. So she felt so much better that she now has got her injection, and as we have, but now they have to move it on to others. But it's a terrifying situation. 4,000 people here in Los Angeles a day catching COVID still.
And so you've had your first immunisation.
I have, yes.
You'll have your second.
I had the Moderna, so I have the second one 28 days after the first.
Okay.
So I'll go back and get one.
That's good to hear that that's rolling out. And again, coming back to conspiracy theories, given that people are living with this, they're living with deaths of neighbours, of friends, of family, have you encountered people who still maintain that COVID-19 is a hoax?
I haven't come across people who have said that, but I know that there are lots of people out there who want to believe that. And again, Donald Trump didn't help things by continually calling it the China virus, being very racist about the way that he was handling his message to Americans. And I think that's done a lot of long-term damage in America for relations between Asia and the United States.
But again, if we move to something more positive, and again, I will open it up to questions in 5 minutes or so. So please, you can either raise your hand and ask Robert the question directly, or just type something in the chat box and we'll be happy to put that to Robert. But Robert, talk to us about Mandela. Again, another historic moment. Share with us your experiences when you met Nelson Mandela, or you covered his release.
Sure. Well, what happened was I was the London correspondent at that stage, and I covered a fair bit of Africa. I'd been down into various trouble spots in Africa over the time, but we were also always watching the Mandela story, and eventually it became very apparent that he was going to be released. So we were on standby. Basically, we had flights booked for about a week because we knew it was going to happen. So it happened, I think it was a Sunday, in London. So I immediately raced out to the airport, as we do, with no notice. Again, left my poor wife Shah with the 3 children and feeding and changing diapers and nappies. And, you know, if there's a hero in this story, it's my wife Shah, who has put up with a lot over the years, who now, actually, thankfully, has now got her own career started all up again and is doing well. She's a top realtor here in the United States, so started all over again. But she's did a great job. But so we jumped on the plane, got down there, and I was there just in time. We got there within time. He was, first of all, remember, he came out in Cape Town, and then he came up and they brought him back up to Johannesburg, and mainly Soweto, which was his home. And that's where you might have seen me standing out in front of his house there. But it was wonderful. It was just a joyous scene. There was just so much excitement, and the black South Africans had been through so much. And, you know, white people were telling us, don't go anywhere near Soweto, you'll get killed, you'll get murdered. It wasn't like that. We went out there, and the minute you explain you're from Australia and why you're here, they were wonderful. They danced around, and they danced around the neighbourhood for hours and hours till eventually he came home. And it was a joyous thing to be part of. And many years on, because I'd covered the story several times, I did go back for his funeral as well after he died. And that too was in many ways quite a celebration of life as well. That was a wonderful thing. And they wanted it to be a positive message because he lived a wonderful life and done so many good things for South Africa. So I was over there at the beginning and the end.
Again, it's extraordinary, the people that you've met. I'll come to it.
I must say, he did go through, when he held a news conference, back in Johannesburg after he walked around and shook hands with all of us and asked us where we were from. And did, yeah, lovely guy, lovely guy.
Well, so yeah, I was going to ask you. You've met Nelson Mandela, you've met Trump, you've met the Clintons, Biden. You've met so many people. Paul Hogan back in the day when he was all the rage, and Russell Crowe, Nicole Kidman.
That's right. Yeah.
These are faces and people that we just see from afar on our screens. But tell me, is there a glow? Does someone like Nelson Mandela truly have an aura about him? You do hear that. You hear that said about Bill Clinton as well.
Yeah, sure.
That these people have that. Is that true? Would you?
Oh yeah, very much so. Obama has the same as well. There's a certain something around them that people are attracted to. And yeah, that is right. And it's the same, with some of the movie stars. One of the great, I can talk about, I've never actually been in a room and met Bill, but I know that people love Bill. Women particularly love Bill, particularly in many ways. And so, yeah, and being there with Nelson Mandela in particular, it was, yeah. And you could see everyone was around and they hovered around him, but there was something special there as well. I can't say so much about the movie stars. You meet these movie stars and they're pretty ordinary people who are very good at learning their lines in many ways. And a lot of them, if they're pretty honest, will tell you that as well.
Okay.
Except, I'll tell you one of the greatest person, probably the most fun interview that I've ever done, and one of the greatest characters of all times was Robin Williams.
Yes.
We would go in, I meet movie stars all the time, particularly in the lead up to the Oscars and the Golden Globes and all of that. So you have to, I have to do politics, but I also have to do the fun things and all of those sorts of things, and the movie star interviews. And, but always I would know if I would ever go in, and some of those movie star interviews, some would say, what are the worst interviews you've ever done? Some of the worst interviews I've ever had to do are with movie stars, because they are pretty grumpy. Because what happens is, if they've got a movie, they have what they call a junket, which means they sit in a room, cameras are all set up, and one reporter after the other is loaded into that room to ask them a question, and they've been sitting there all day. So if they started yesterday, and they did all yesterday, and then they did today, and you're at 4 o'clock on the second day, they don't want to know about you really, but they go through the motions. But they're difficult to light up. Everyone, of course, except Robin Williams, who will just turn it on for everybody. It was amazing. It was just an extraordinary thing, and he did the worst. As he said, I can do the worst Australian accent you've ever heard. You want to hear it? I said, you bet. And he would. And he's such a character.
Yeah, it was a very sad loss, wasn't it? That at the same time as all of that, he was really struggling with depression and and again, yeah, what a wonderful. That's really interesting to hear that the characters that he portrayed on the screen were like that. So we talked about celebrities, politicians. I have a question from Matt on sport. What's your fondest, most memorable moment reporting on US sport?
Going to the Masters Golf, as you do when you're the reporter, for free. You don't even have to buy a ticket. And the ticket is for the entire tournament. That's an easy one. I play a bit of golf now and again. I'm not a great golfer, but I try a little. But just being able to go to the Masters and walk around and stand under the big tree and interview them as they come off, that was the real thrill of a lifetime. That was great. I enjoyed that.
It seems
I also got to go to a couple of Super Bowls as well. So the reporter tag actually gets you into a lot of good spots.
Yeah, so for all of the dashing, heroic images we see, there's some of those nice elements to the job as well. But again, in the opening reel, we did see images where your life was in danger. Can you tell us a little bit about that scene where you're being shelled? Where did that happen and what happened? And then a second follow-up to that is, how on earth are you able to, you seem so calm and unflustered by being in these various situations. So can you take us back to that moment and tell us how you managed to be unruffled by what happens around you?
Well, that happened, the first one that you saw there, that was probably the one in Belfast. That was in a cemetery in Belfast. What had happened was the SAS, the Special Military Services of British intelligence, had come across the fact that a couple of the IRA terrorists were planning to attack a band, a British military band down in Gibraltar. They'd heard about it and they were onto them. They chased them because they're doing a recce, as they say, the IRA, and the military chased them and killed them. Unusually, the British authorities allowed the IRA to give them a hero's funeral in Belfast. And that's what that was about. That was a funeral. And we had the IRA members were being buried at the time. Jerry Adams, the head of the Sinn Féin at the time, was right near the edge and he was going to give the soliloquy. And the IRA, being very media aware, said, come on, all you guys, come over here quickly and you can stand by the cemetery, right by, and you can see the Jerry Adams speaks. So we were right up close. And in amongst that was one rogue Protestant terrorist. And he sneaked in amongst everybody with homemade hand grenades and weapons and started throwing the hand grenades trying to kill Jerry Adams, of course, who we were next to. So we dived down and lots of explosions going off. People were shot. 3 or 4 people were killed in there and many more were wounded at the time. But again, you get up and you push on because you know, okay, a huge story is happening right here in front of me. And so you put your reporter's hat on at that stage. And yeah, so far, so good. We survived, did the story, got an amazing story back to Australia at the time. It won a few awards at the time, but I've been lucky, you know, I haven't really been seriously affected mentally by being in dangerous situations. There was more than one. I was caught up in another one in Africa and another one in Yugoslavia when that broke apart, and we were told what happened was we were down and a lot of young soldiers had been injured and they were trapped in a ambush there, and the young lieutenant came up with a gun, put it more or less at me and said, I can't get out of here, but I want you to drive the wounded soldiers to hospital. And I go, well, I don't know. And I looked around and they'd already loaded them into my car at that point. So we followed the rules. With a wounded soldier in the car, I got in and drove and then had to drive back into what was enemy territory with a military guy in military greens in the back of the car. And of course, we were perhaps could have been shot ourselves, seeing we had what looked like a military guy in the car, but luckily I waved my paper out of as I got close to the hospital, white paper out of the hospital, and went very slowly and pulled up at the hospital, opened the door, and they took him out.
But again, you know, you as you say, you put on your journalistic reporting lens when those things are happening. But just as you're telling it now, it sounds like a really normal story. But there must be a moment when you've filed your story, it's gone to air, and then it hits you. Is that the case? Do you find that these life-threatening situations come back to they sort of have bite later emotionally, or you're on to the next story?
No, I usually move on to the next story. I don't get too worried about it. I have had friends, obviously, who have been troubled by these sorts of things, but I've been lucky. For some reason, I've just been able to push on. I've had very good support at home. When I used to get home from those sorts of situations, there wasn't time to be mulling too much because Shah had already organised to take the kids to the pantomime the next day, and then we're going for a picnic in Richmond Park, and then we've got 2 dinner parties this week coming up as well. So let's move on.
Wow, okay. So we have a question from a fellow journalist, Philippa O'Donnell, who was with the ABC radio for many years in Australia. And she's asking, will you return to Australia? What's next now that you've finished full-time reporting? And a really interesting second question, would you prefer that your children were born in Australia or in the US in a pandemic?
Sure. The answer to will we move back to Australia, the answer is no, because you have to make a decision eventually. You can't pine for somewhere that you would like to be. I would love to live in Australia on the beach, you know, overlooking the waves coming in every morning. But what we did, we made a decision when we came here. The children were only 12, 10 and 5 at the time. They went to school here, they went to university here, they have relationships here, they've got lovely partners now. And we have our grandchildren. So no, we're not moving back to Australia. Our life is here. And Shah's got a great job too, which he enjoys doing. Do I wish my children were born? One child was born here back in '85. The other 2 were born in London, actually. So there's a lot of passports running through our children at the moment if they want it. But I don't wish that they were born in Australia. We're very happy with the way they are, the way that they've grown up. But they feel very connected. I've got to tell you, they feel very connected to Australia because we go back and all the aunties and uncles have been there over the years for them.
We all know how that feels. We're all living,
true.
Many of us on this watch leading expatriate lives. But again, you know, you reported on Paul Hogan when he was the face of Australia all those years ago.
Yes,
how has the image of Australia changed as it's reported in the US and in the UK? Please tell us it has. Has it changed from the days of Paul Hogan to today? And how is Australia viewed today?
Well, Australia, you still get the same thing no matter where I travel in the United States. The Americans will come up to you and say, oh boy, I've always really wanted to go there. I love Australia. They see it on television. They see the wide open spaces. They see the beautiful clean air. I always want to go. Every American will say that to you. They said, but it's too far. I said, it's not too far. You know, you get on a plane here, have 3 bourbons, go to sleep, wake up, you're in Sydney, 6 o'clock in the morning. Oh, that easy. Oh, well, I must save up and go. A lot of them won't get there. But no, they still have a sort of a feel. They don't quite think that we're still Crocodile Dundee territory, but they still do see Australia as a very different place from the United States. They see Australia as a place of clean air and lovely people, friendly people. That's their perception of Australia in general.
And a question now from Darren Bowden, who's our board director. Can you talk about, again, I just asked you about how Australia's perceived over the time you've been reporting internationally. Sure. How has the US changed over the years that you've been covering the US?
Well, I think I would say America's changed from when I first started reporting here. It was 1985 when Ronald Reagan was the president. I was here for 2 years and then I eventually went to London. But in those days, I could see that Reagan could get the Democrats in and he could negotiate with them and all of that. And I would travel out into the United States where people worked and they all had jobs and they were quite happy with their lives. As I mentioned earlier on in this piece, now there's a lot of Americans are very bitter about their lives the way they are. It's changed a lot. It's a very, very divided nation, more so than I've ever seen before. And more so in the last 4 years than it even was during Obama or during Bush or during Clinton. It's extraordinarily divided now. And it's going to be a huge job for Joe Biden to try to mend these fences in just a 4-year period.
Do you think he can? Is that possible?
I don't know whether it's possible. I don't know. It's just, I've never seen so much anger out there as we will see. And when you're watching the news bulletins there in Hong Kong tonight, because they will show that video, which we hadn't seen before, of those angry Americans going into there. And, you know, the police, so many police and Capitol Police have been really seriously mentally and physically injured by that, but mentally injured as well, because they said they didn't know how to handle this, because this wasn't a terrorist attack as we believe terrorists were, something from outside and coming in and beating up and dropping bombs on it. These were people, they say, who looked like the man next door. And yet I was supposed to spray them. I had to beat them back and they were smashing us to pieces. Yet I was a police officer here just trying to defend the Capitol building, the headquarters of the Parliament, as it were. And they said, that's why these police are seriously affected by what they had to do. And that was the division that you'll see on those videos tonight when you see that news. Those ugly, ugly crowds coming in, a lot of racists coming in, but then being confronted by police officers who they normally would have huge respect for, but were driven by something more that actually forced them to even beat up police officers who these people, and you've got to remember, some of these people who were the rioters were police officers. They were members of the military. And they must be thinking now, how did I actually beat up those police officers, the people I usually respect? But they were driven by something, and that was certainly the speech that Trump gave earlier in the day.
And we've seen some of the evidence as well about how the the lawmakers were sheltering and hearing the pounding of the mob trying to get into the chamber. And again, I believe at least two of the police officers there have since taken their own lives. It's going to reverberate for a long time. But we're coming to the hour, Robert, so I did want to close with one final question, if I may. And I'm sorry, there are a number of other questions here, but it's been a wonderful conversation. We could speak for hours. But what's next for you then? You're not going to go back to Australia. You're not full-time with Channel 9 anymore. What's next? I mean, this is normally the stage when journalists like you write a book about this amazing life where you've been there and borne witness to all the historic moments that any of us remember.
Well, as a reporter, I have a notebook and I've got lots and lots of things. And every time I think about something, I remember that. I remember that Kerry Packer story. That was a good one. I'll tell that one. And I'll do this. And when I was in that situation, yes, I would like to put, and I am putting it all down. And, even if it's a book for young journalists, I don't know whether journalists who write these books tell me they don't sell a lot. But if it encourages young journalists to become journalists, despite the angst that we get often from the public about being a journalist these days, I think it would be worthwhile. I'm already doing media relations for a friend of mine who has a big security company here. I'm reworking his website. I'm keeping busy. I'm still writing for him. I'm writing material. I'm creating content for his website. And also I'm enjoying writing for the online situations for Channel 9. Sydney Morning Herald and The Age are asking us now to do things because Channel 9's involved with them. So as a journalist, I'm still a journalist, keeping busy.
Excellent. Well, look, Robert, it's been wonderful to have this conversation with you. Again, the face that's so familiar, that's been beamed into our living rooms across the decades. It is still extraordinary to think that you're over 65 and eligible for a vaccine, and also that you're a grandfather. And again, it was a reminder of the youthful looks that we saw, because we've followed you as you've grown up and experienced this as well. So a big thank you for joining us your evening. And if I can also just take this chance to thank all of you who have joined this event. This will be my last event for the Australian Chamber of Commerce in Hong Kong. It's been a great honour and a privilege to serve you. And don't be strangers, I'm not going anywhere. I'll remain in Hong Kong, and I look forward to keeping in touch with you all. So thank you all for your support. Robert, again, a very big thank you. Good night.
Thank you. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you.